In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the upcoming winter, taking a deep dive into the differences between last winter and this one, updated model guidance that is now calling for a very cold and potentially very snowy winter ahead for the East, and also some of our analogs kind of in contrast with those models. I know that we've already talked about some of this data. I want to kind of just bring it all in full circle and compare and contrast all of it. I think that that's the best way to go about this. And first things first, I mean, for those of you that are, constantly commenting like, last winter was so warm, this one's going to be exactly the same. I'm not saying that this winter definitely won't be warm. There's a lot of variables at play, and that certainly could potentially happen, unfortunately. However, there is very key differences between last winter and this winter, and I would definitely say that this winter is going to be far different than the previous one in many different ways, regardless of if that's good or bad for cold and snow lovers. So for one thing, we were under the El Nino here last winter, so we had very warm waters in the equatorial Pacific, and this really impacts global weather trends, but also specifically the United States. We see big time changes because of this El Nino, and in many cases polar opposites as far as the types of precipitation patterns especially, and even some temperature patterns are impacted by this. This year, we are moving into a weak La Nina, which is considered to be one of the more favorable phases to be in. Obviously, if it was a strong La Nina, that's a whole different case. In either case, like if you look at the bottom of your screen here, anything on the extreme ends is really not that favorable. So anything on a strong El Nino to a strong La Nina, you want to be as close to the middle as possible for a cold and snowy winter. Obviously, they do happen on either side of the spectrum, but the middle gives you the best chance historically at seeing a cold and snowy winter. We are expected to be very close to the middle, slightly on the La Nina side, which is considered to be a very favorable place to be for cold and snow lovers. With all that being said, let's dive into that model guidance first things first. I know you guys are probably excited about this, as we're just now getting the very first winter model guidance here, and this is for December of 2024. We see a very strong signal of a positive PNA, which is very crucial for cold and snow in the East. I talked about this all winter long last winter, and I've actually talked about this for years, as it's such a strong impact on our weather patterns. That stands for Pacific North American Oscillation, by the way, and all it means is really warmth along that western seaboard area. What this does is it forces all of this cold air that would be over the northwest of the United States and the southwest of Canada, and it forces it eastward to trickle down into the eastern states. And we see that actually happening on screen here, as we have just plenty of cold throughout central Canada, diving southward into the eastern states. This is a very, very strong look for cold and snow in the East. We will go over the precipitation in a moment, which also really, really supports that case. And this is only for December, by the way, so let's move this towards January here. A little bit of a thaw. We see things warm up a little bit here across some of the Midwest into kind of the Southeast especially. The Northeast and Mid-Atlantic kind of hang on to some of these neutral to below normal temperatures. And really that positive PNA spreads eastward, which in part really spreads that cold air eastward, and we do see that happening here. So that is kind of the effect that you get there. February, however, kind of brings it back full circle. We see a lot of this warmth trend back in for the Southwest here, so a little bit more of a positive PNA look. And again, we get this kind of trickle over effect into some of the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, Mid-Atlantic, and the Northeast here. So at least for these areas, I mean, we have a solid 2 to 3 months of cold here for the upcoming winter, which would be a really, really strong signal, of course. Now let's take a look at the precipitation pattern. And for December, we're looking quite dry for most areas in the Midwest, Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, deeper south central states, the Gulf states, and even up through the Southeast. But we do see a little bit of some above normal precipitation here for the Northeast, which could spell snow, obviously, as the New England and upstate New York areas are very known for their snow. Combine this with the cold that is expected for December, according to this model, and you get a very snowy outlook, especially for the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast here. Maybe not so much for the Midwest, Ohio Valley, South Central, and Southeast, of course. We do see that the Northern Rockies and Northern Plains look pretty good as well. And I should mention that during La Ninas, like the one we're expected to move into, we do typically see a storm track that moves through the Northwest and dives southward and impacts areas across both the Northeast and sometimes it's even further west for the Ohio Valley and the Great Lakes as well. And we typically see a lot less for the Southwest, South Central, and Southeast as opposed to an El Nino, and that is true here. So this is definitely this has a lot of climate support to it, I would say. Let's take a look at January. Things look a little bit more positive here for a few areas, especially the Northwest here into the Northern Rockies, looking very, very high precipitation, which of course, for a lot of these mountaintop locations would always spell snow during January for the most part. For the South Central states, we actually get quite a bit of moisture, which will be well welcomed after the dry December that we are expecting according to this model guidance. Southeast, and for the most part, the entire East Coast is looking neutral to slightly below normal as far as the precipitation is concerned. And that is kind of common in La Niñas to see some dry spells like this for the eastern seaboard. We do see from time to time, we're going to talk about this in a minute, we do see sometimes some nor'easters, but typically you see a little bit less of them during La Niñas as opposed to El Niños. Let's take this one step further towards February, and we do see a little bit of an area of higher precipitation here for the deeper south into some of the lower Appalachian mountain range area. Still the eastern seaboard seeing a bit less here according to this model, but the Northern Rockies do fantastic. Same with the upper Midwest and Great Lakes here. Just a little bit less for that East Coast. And as we move towards March, though, we see much higher amounts of precipitation along that eastern area here. Also for the Great Lakes and Midwest, we're still seeing a lot. The Rockies, some of the Cascades, and even through the Northern Plains, we are seeing plenty of precipitation here for the month of March. Now, as we take a look here at our temperature analogs, I want to kind of compare this to what we just looked at. This is overall what I'm seeing from all of my analogs that look similar to this year. Mostly regarding weaker La Niñas, and more specifically, weaker La Niñas that followed stronger El Niños were a lot of these years. So that is kind of how I picked these out. We see that the coldest pocket is kind of this Midwest area into the Northeast here. I would say something like this is the area to watch for the coldest air according to these analogs, but especially here, Northern Plains, upper Midwest, where this is significant cold. 5 degrees below average for a 3-month period is insane, especially when we're taking, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 analog years is quite a bit. That's a large sample size, so definitely some pretty strong statistics with likely the warmest area across the Southwest here looking at this guidance. Now, as we break it down month by month, here's what December of those years looked like. As you can see, again, looks pretty similar to just the overall 3-month period. We see very cold across the North Central and still pretty cold along that eastern seaboard area. So fairly cold there. And then again, that Southwest area looking the warmest, which is quite typical during La Niñas. Here's the month of January looking cold across the board. I don't know how to really even break this down because we're just seeing a lot of cold overall here. It does reach the eastern seaboard a lot better here for the month of January as opposed to December, which makes sense. Sometimes the upper Midwest and central states aren't really influenced by oceans as much, so they can get deeper cold earlier. The East Coast obviously has to, cool down the Atlantic waters a little bit, and January, February tend to be a bit colder for these areas typically. Now, as we take a look at February here, we see that we get a little bit of a wintertime thaw in the east, where a lot of these years, again, a very large sample size, by the way, we saw a warming trend for the month of February, which is very interesting, and saw a lot colder conditions out west. So maybe a wintertime thaw for the east and a bit of a cool down, a little more wintry look here for February across the west. Interesting to see this large of a sample size again, showing such a strong signal like that. Interesting. And believe it or not, the coldest month here, and this isn't even included in our 3-month period, but as a bonus, I want to show you guys the month of March, and this looks absolutely frigid. This is the coldest by far of any of the months that we're looking at today. We see 2 to 4 degrees below average in these lighter blues here. So for these lighter blues, that's already 2 to 4 degrees below average, which is very far below average already for a whole month. These areas here are 4 to 6 degrees below average in the medium blue, which is, again, very ridiculous as far as how cold that is. But to make matters even wilder, we have 6 to 8 degrees below average here in these darker blues, which is insane. I mean, that would be just completely frigid from start to finish almost for the month of March. So potentially, the coldest month will be March. We'll all obviously have to see and look back on this video. That'd be very interesting. But some of these analog years are definitely showing up some very, very strong cold signals for the month of March there. Now, I want to dive into the precipitation a little bit. This is something we didn't do in our original analog video. And again, Across La Ninas, typically you see drier conditions in the southwest, south central, and southeast, and we do see a lot of that here. So the south overall just lacking that storm track. And then we get more across the north here, especially the northwest and mid-Atlantic in this case, for the December to February of all of those years. So this is kind of looking a little bit classic for weaker La Ninas. Let's break it down month by month. Here's December, and honestly, I think this is one of the drier months in the east overall that we're going to see today. Very wet out west, and surprisingly, even to the southwest for Southern California, which is pretty uncommon during a La Nina. So pretty interesting to see that. And what's pretty ironic about this is one of the biggest snowstorms that we see in any of these analog years is actually the Boxing Day blizzard of December 24th through 28th, 2010. Where in the lightest gray shade, we saw 1 to 4 inches of snow. The whites there, 4 to 10 inches of snow. The lightest blue, 10 to 20 inches. So my corridor here of Southeast Virginia, I remember this when I was a kid, getting over a foot of snow. I think it was like maybe close to 20 inches there that we actually had. So very, very large blizzard for us and even Northeast North Carolina. And that went all the way up the East Coast with even some of these darker blues popping up at 20 to 30 inches of snowfall. So a major East Coast blizzard that came alongside a very strong nor'easter. That's what I wanted to mention. So even though we see less nor'easters during La Ninas historically, that doesn't mean that they don't happen at all. And this is a great example of a major one that happened just before Christmas and during Christmas, actually, for many folks in 2010. Absolutely crazy. Definitely a historic one, and it was during a year that looks quite similar to this one. So who knows? Maybe something like this is in the coming up for us. So we'll have to see. Obviously, January. I guess I lied. January was quite dry as well here on this analog for the eastern seaboard. Again, you do get the overall lack of nor'easters oftentimes. What's surprising is this inland dry area. Typically, this is a very good area during La Ninas. We saw it dry for this month in a lot of these analogs, and the wettest conditions were across the northwest and north central states, with very, very dry across the southwest, south central, and southeast especially. For February, things turned around in a hurry. We saw well above average precipitation in the east here, so storm after storm after storm in a lot of these years, even up the eastern seaboard. So I'm willing to bet that there was quite a few nor'easters here as we saw large amounts of precipitation along the eastern seaboard. So again, don't expect to go all winter long without them. They're just going to be a little bit less prevalent than you would expect in an El Nino year. Again, look at the northwest, looking great as far as precipitation, and then the southwest is dead dry. So that is very common during these La Nina years, like I mentioned. And last but certainly not least, here's March as a bonus. Remember, very cold, and we actually saw a very wet southeast, which is, again, pretty uncommon during La Ninas, so surprising to see this. I'm sure a lot of these were in the form of like southern sliders, and this probably brought a lot of southeast snowfall, believe it or not. So definitely something to pay attention to and potentially watch for. The south central was very dry. We saw that the southwest saw plenty of precipitation here across portions of California and Oregon, and then it was actually quite dry across Washington state there, which is pretty interesting. So definitely a little bit of a flip in the pattern here for the months of March for all of these years. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. We're going to be talking a lot more about the winter. We even have our first preliminary winter forecast coming up very, very soon for you guys. So be on the lookout for that one. Our first fall outlook will be coming out soon, and I can't wait to make more videos just like this one as well regarding the fall and winter months. As you know, that's my favorite time of the year to talk about. Be sure to subscribe as we do upload every single day. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it. Leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.